I'm Heather Cabot. I'm a longtime journalist, and I'm the author of the new Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream, which was just published by Penguin Random House in August. And I am pleased to share the virtual stage with Ted Chung. Ted is a founder, investor, award-winning entertainment executive. Among his many roles, he is also the co-founder of Mary Jane, Casa Verde Capital, and Leafs by Snoop. He also stars as one of the compelling protagonists of my new book, The New Chardonnay. And I had the unique opportunity to be a fly on the wall in his world over the last few years as I was reporting the book. And I learned so much from Ted. Ted, it's a pleasure to sit down with you again.
Heather, it's always great to see you and talk.
Thank you. Well, let's get right into it. I think a lot of people who will be listening have the election on their mind. So I just wanted to start off just quickly. This election is probably one of the most consequential of our lifetimes. The White House, the U.S. Senate, the 5 states that are considering cannabis legalization. So as an investor, and you were so early in this industry, how has your investment thesis changed? How has it changed now at the point that we're in? And how has it evolved since you first got into cannabis?
I would have to say focus. The phrase that's tossed around a lot in our war rooms is specific is the new broad, and understanding better which of the organizations that are out there, either domestically or internationally, understand what area of the vertical stack they have domain ownership over and expertise, and not to be all things to everybody. And I think as that relates to the onboarding states, I think everyone's realizing that, and we're certainly realizing that having territorial control means a lot more than spreading yourself thin in your efforts, in your CapEx across multiple territories. And that's the better long-term strategy to eventually win the race.
And it's a really good point, because during the years that we were working together on the book and the years that I cover in the book, I really focus a lot on the MSOs and how they were building state by state. And I think I'd love to hear what, your thoughts about, what have we learned since then? It sounds like what you're saying is that figuring out specific territories as opposed to getting as many states, as many licenses as possible, may be the smarter strategy.
Yeah, I think that it's important that we always keep in mind the end patient and the end consumer, right? At the end of the day, that's our most important contingency. So as focus is achieved, as making sure that supply meets demand in a specific territory, I think that our business practices get better. I think that communication between provincial, municipal, and territorial leadership in government and business becomes stronger. And that allows for a better customer experience that is normalized and dependable from the end patient and consumer.
So as an investor, your advice to folks who may be watching this, who maybe are just starting to research getting into this industry, you think that they really should be looking at opportunities that are much more focused on regions as opposed to, we're talking about plant touching opportunities
Correct, yes.
Regions, as opposed to these huge, sort of national conglomerates at this moment. And just to stay with politics, I wanted to just ask you, we don't know what's going to happen, obviously, with the change of administration. We don't know whether the Senate will ultimately go blue. What are your thoughts about, what's on the horizon, and what are the things that investors and entrepreneurs should be looking for as we get through November and beyond politically?
Sure. I think that there is inevitable momentum from citizens and the government following that decriminalization, social justice, and the economic benefits are an undeniable avalanche right now. and everyone has to get on board. It's just a question of how. Whereas I think, even in the early stages of us working together and spending time while you were writing the new Chardonnay, you saw us pushing an uphill battle, and now that critical momentum has been achieved, and it's important to see, in time, what that means as far as opportunity set versus, maybe overextended opportunities, right? And I think, to go back to your other point, I'm really, with that statement, addressing plant touching opportunities. I think the scalable industries are the scalable industries inside or outside of cannabis, right? Technology, certainly, whether that be, back-end commerce platforms, whether it be testing platforms, inventory management, those are always going to be scalable as part of the set of being in the technology business, right? But as far as, being in the plant touching side, cultivation, distribution, sales, retail, that's what I think is really interesting. I think growing a brand and a really, strong bonfire in one area means more than having a few matches lit in a few places.
One of the things that I loved about your story, and that I really was trying to bring to a mainstream audience, was this understanding of ancillary businesses. And you were so prescient in the way that you thought about this way back in 2013 when you decided to co-found Casa Verde. Can you, for the audience, talk about a little bit about how that happened, and what was it, the scalability? I mean, did you really know back then that those were the opportunities that might be the safest? I mean, in some senses, the safest bets back then?
Well, I'd like to be able to say that I had the financial foresight, but the truth of the matter is that at that time I was doing a lot of international business and on the road with various influencers, including Snoop, and it gave me a unique line of sight into the cannabis subcultures and nuances all around the globe, because we were traveling literally for 2 years straight from, Eastern Europe to Africa to Asia. And of course, for those that require medicine, we have to be creative in finding ways to get medicine on the ground. And there were, very robust ecosystems, and you could see sort of where there were regional differences in both cultivation technology and strain offerings and method of consumption. And then, you could see where there was a real similar need in efficiencies. And those efficiencies were traditionally on the peripheral side. So I think that's what, when we came back to the States, which obviously had the most mature market at the time, and we started to, really build relationships and stay in touch with everyone, we could see the opportunity set to scale some of those, call it back-end technologies, agricultural technologies in the space.
I kind of call it the unsexy stuff. I mean, it's very counterintuitive. It makes so much sense now, but I think to an outside audience, the fact that you had the foresight to think of it that way, I think it was really brilliant. In many ways, I think it kind of set the stage for the rest of the industry. I mean, Casa Verde really wasn't one of the first venture capital firms to focus on ancillary businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably less than the fingers on one hand can tell you, the one or two other groups that were out there. Each of us had sort of a unique perspective and lens on what we would focus on in the beginning. But yeah, there weren't many of us, right? And I have to be honest in saying that, more than identifying the opportunity in the cannabis industry, I think that what all of us did as those early pioneers was really develop the method, the platform, and the accessibility to institutional capital markets and traditional private offices to get involved in this combination of education, premonition, and intuition in what is now, I think, a robust marketplace for various emerging industries.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to brands because I know you want to talk about that. And before we leave this topic, though, I'm just thinking for this audience, are there other areas of the non-plant touching, parts of the industry that you're looking at? I mean, what's the next big thing going to be as more states come online? Is it innovations in compliance software? Like where do you think the opportunities are going to be for these non-plant touching kinds of businesses? What is the innovation and what are you interested in?
For non-plant touching or plant touching?
For non-plant touching. Before we go on to building brands and actual products, I'd just love to. I mean, you've made investments in Dutchie and Metric and Greenbits and a lot of really interesting tech companies. I guess, from where you sit, what do you think what's the problem that needs to be solved next?
I am very keen on, and this has to coincide, Heather, with regulatory development and working, with regional authorities. But I'm very keen on how the D2C model and delivery systems can be actualized and how much of those systems can be nationalized, because convenience is key. And as the efficiencies across scale allow D2C or delivery opportunities to provide better value to the customer from a price point perspective, I think that is that's going to be a really robust area for growth.
And I think, with the pandemic and the demand and the shift to delivery that many dispensaries have had to make during the last 8 months, I think that that validates that idea. And is that one of the reasons why you're looking more towards D2C and delivery and how to actually reach consumers because of what you've seen with demand over the course of the pandemic? Absolutely.
And I think all of us, whether we're in the cannabis industry or in business in general, we were very intrigued by the sort of dynamic, traditional mental obstacles that everyone, from those younger than us and those older than us, have jumped over, right? The mere fact that we're doing this, usually you and I would be sitting across from each other somewhere. Yeah. And whether it's, my 6-year-old niece, homeschooling, or whether it's, my parents who are seniors and they're conducting their businesses. My mother's a therapist and she's seeing all her patients she can name more remote conferencing platforms than I can, right? And she knows how to maneuver through them and share documents and record sessions. So, I think all the sort of areas where we were right on the cusp of the whole buy-in from society at large, we were just way past that now. And what that means when I say D2C and delivery, I'm not just talking about immediacy, right? We've seen the growth of, for example, in food shopping habits with the growth of scheduled delivery programs like Thrive. I think that there's a need for immediacy, and then there are certain product SKUs and areas within the cannabis industry, certainly things like pain management, wellness, whether that be CBD or THC, that can be much more of a scheduled offering, right? And there are some really interesting companies that I think are pushing the path forward to identify, pivot, and properly accommodate our customers.
So, are you thinking about subscription models when you talk about scheduled? So, like where you would subscribe and like Thrive or some of these other. I mean, I had subscribed to a bunch of them when we were in the middle of lockdown of frozen salmon and all kinds of things that you could just order and you knew it would come every 2 weeks, or fresh produce or whatever. Is that what you mean?
Exactly.
It would be sort of
scheduled
a
delivery. Yes, not necessarily something immediate. We are going to have immediate needs, right? There's in our household, there are very scheduled things that come to our house now, whether through Thrive or through Amazon, that are, and I'm talking about consumable products that we are able to plan out for. And then there's also the times where, it's 8:00 at night and I haven't cooked anything and I use Postmates. And I think that as cannabis customers, again, both on the CBD and THC spectrum, have evolved, and we are, for better or worse, we're at home now more often and in one place, we're able to regulate and look at cost savings and the value of the premium we might pay for immediacy versus the much needed economic efficiencies of scheduled delivery.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's pivot a little bit to brands. And I mean, one of the things that I think has been interesting, and certainly during the course, that we've known each other with, the Schedule I federal prohibition continues to be in place. It's really hard for companies to build national brands right now because you can't have a national supply chain. You can't advertise. As you mentioned earlier, every state has a different regulatory landscape. But when we've talked, I think you've been increasingly bullish about the power of brands. So what do you see? Why is that? And what do you see going forward? What makes you so optimistic that brands will be the future?
Well, I think from firsthand sight, it's because there's a lot of brands that we're creating internally at our companies and incubating that have had a real surge in demand and opportunity across multiple states. That's always the easy indicator. I think the trend is that you are starting to see more California brands certainly starting to make their way across the country heading east. And what really gave me a signal about, my premonition that brands would be this sort of next phase of arbitrage and opportunity is how now there are brands based in smaller markets based on capita size, and those brands heading westbound, right?
Oh.
Which is a big kind of turning of the cultural tide in cannabis, in my opinion. And those smaller markets really do mean a lot in the grand scheme of establishing the footprints for a national framework.
Can you talk about some of the things that you're incubating? Can you talk about some of your partnerships or new products or brands that you may have coming out soon?
Sure, I can talk about them and in broad strokes, right? So there's two products, and both of these happen to be created with pretty well-known influencers and really individuals of cultural relevance in each of these demographics. But one is a brand called Marijuana, and that is really geared towards female consumers, consumers who have a very responsible management of their time, and low-dose products and SKUs that allow for allow for a very controlled usage. And then there's, on the other end of the spectrum, there is a very value-oriented brand that has a strong tie to give back to veterans that is launching, called Limitless.
Okay. Are you still, so clearly the Chardonnay moms are still potentially a market for you, given the first type of products that you're mentioning?
Yes.
You feel that's still going to be a big market moving forward?
Absolutely. You're one of the inspirations for us to create Marijuana, by the way. It's the product made for you. Next time I see you, I want you to be smoking on a marijuana vape.
I know a lot of people who will be interested in my little town here. What are the other types of products that you're also looking at? So are you looking at beverages? Are you guys doing beverages? Are you thinking about other types of consumables? I mean, I saw that Cannabis THC-infused beverages are supposedly coming to the US next summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is innovation in beverages for rapid onset, rapid offset, so that there is a familiar usage for the consumer, right, in other areas of recreation. And I think that I'm really intrigued and excited to see how, when these products with this innovative technology comes to market, if that really impacts and changes the kind of framework of how the current landscape looks at beverages, right? I think the common denominator is that beverages have too much of a long kind of offset time, and that for the traditional beverage experience, whether it's a glass of water, a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, or a glass of beer, you have a habitual understanding of how much time you can do that with somebody, and then on to your next thing, right? And I'm excited to see it as those types of new products, and certainly, cannabis beverages as they come to the U.S., where that changes how the current cannabis consumer perceives beverages. But for our products right now, we're mainly focused. I still think that I'm very bullish on the vape category. I'm, certainly flowers, pre-rolls, different sizes and dimensions of pre-rolls. I don't think we've seen the full extent of innovation there, which is a big part of how we are developing our brands, and some new technologies and form factors you'll see even in that space. And then, edibles, certainly what we're going to have in both product brands in Marijuana and Limitless, we'll have a variety of edibles. So,
do you think that, one of the things that we talked about, one of your goals from the start was normalization. And I guess as we talk about, the new brands, the new products that you're thinking about, the future of brands, I guess, where are we at? Where do you think we are? From where you started, how far have we come in terms of normalization? And I guess, what is there still left to do? How far is there still to go? And what do you think some of the tipping points will be 67% of Americans already approve of legalization, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're using these products necessarily, or even using them out in the open. The stigma, I think, is still there in certain parts of the country. So I guess from from where you sit, what still needs to be done?
Well, it's interesting. I've used this analogy before, and this gentleman wasn't running for president, but Vice President Biden, I had the opportunity to see him talk years ago, and he said that, one of the most influential instruments in nationalizing gay marriage was the television show Will and Grace, and how it's not about the fringe segments of society. It's left or right. It's really about, there's a big section in the middle that just doesn't feel comfortable or familiar with a new proposition. And once there's a familiarity, then it turned from, I don't know enough, so I'm going to lean towards no, to, oh, that's pretty normal. Like, okay, like, why not, right? So I think that's a big part of Mary Jane as a media company's initiative, and what we look to as our North Star is creating shows, producing shows, packaging shows like Martha Stewart and Snoop's Potluck Dinner Party that help kind of bring normalization to the mainstream through media. At least that's where we see our role in that. Mm-hmm. And that's, good for the, tribe of cannabis enthusiasts and business people. And if we can do that in a creative way so that it's not pandering and it's true, real, relatable narratives and stories or of interest, whether or not cannabis is a part of the story or not, I think that more of that audio-visual media helps the mainstream, puts the content, puts cannabis in the forefront of the discussion at the dinner table during prime time, and allows people to go, oh, that person's like me. They're consuming cannabis. Why can't I? It starts to become familiar, and we start to see more of the tipping of the scale.
Mm-hmm. Also, as we started these conversations back in 2017.
By the way, also, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Look what's happening with your book, right? Like, the new Chardonnay. I mean, certainly what I'm just trying to say is that, that like everything happens in steps, right? The fact that your book, that the new Chardonnay has come out, it's so well received and it's growing such a large audience is just indicative of what we're talking about, right? It's the content that gets shared, the stories, and media is just a platform to amplify those stories. Before it was word of mouth and now in anecdotes, now it's in television shows, books, podcasts, and it starts to become, life starts to mimic art, and everyone starts saying, yeah, this is just the way things are, right? Mm-hmm. And I certainly think Canada's federal legalization was a big shift in the taboo.
Absolutely, which is one of the reasons why, and you were really the inspiration for this, that I wanted to include Canada in the book, because I felt it was really important for the audience, again, a kind of curious, very mainstream audience like myself, to understand the influence of Canada, in addition to the cultural shift, but also from a capital markets point of view, and sort of how that was able to really fuel innovation, and in many ways the legitimacy of a lot of these companies, because they were able to, suddenly they're publicly traded. That means something to people, and the retail investors can get involved in these companies, even though it's been kind of a wild ride. It takes it out of the shadows, right? It makes it feels like it's legitimate. So thank you for that, because and thank you for mentioning my book. I appreciate it. One of the first conversations that we had, we also talked about the fact that one of the reasons why you and Snoop wanted to invest in the industry so early was the idea that it would be an impetus to create opportunities for disenfranchised groups of people, and also to be able to hopefully right the wrongs of the war on cannabis. And obviously, as the industry has evolved, and it has evolved very quickly, but I think most people can agree that the social equity piece of this has moved slowly. And there are a lot of different reasons why. But I wanted to ask your thoughts on that. You were very idealistic in the early days. What are your thoughts about, as you've seen more states come online, as you've seen, the presidential candidates talk about marijuana reform, and as it relates to systemic racism in our country?
Criminal record and so forth.
Everything. Yeah. In fact, I actually, I do a podcast too, and my podcast this week is about expungement efforts in California, which I don't think is enough. It should be a part of the conversation even more. What are your thoughts about the slow pace of social equity in the industry. And what are you, through Casa Verde, through Mary Jane, through your investment portfolio, what are you doing to make the industry more equitable?
Well, I think there are two things, right? One is you need champions and allies. And I think lastly, you have to set an example. Once you have those three things, then, our method of contributing to that would be amplifying that on a platform again through media and Mary Jane. So what I mean is, like, you need allies and champions in the sense that we need to have these discussions more frequently. And you have to be an example because you have to inspire those and educate and help shepherd in whether it's gender diversity, LGBTQIA diversity, ethnic diversity into the space. And that self-reflection is so important. Right? People have to look at you and say, oh, someone who looks like me can do that? Then then I can do it, right? And so being on, a proud participant in things like, this growth conference, or, Puffy asked us to do a roundtable discussion in front of a lot of young Black entrepreneurs at the Volt conference about cannabis and where are the opportunity sets, what are the challenges, and where are the real roles? What are the jobs that are available in this space? I think that I try to participate. Snoop tries to participate. Kern at Casa Verde tries to participate. All of our group and leadership wants to be proactive in making sure that people know our stories. They know, where the obstacles and pitfalls are, and hopefully make their journey to success shorter. And that's a big part of it. As far as the social justice piece is concerned, with Mary Jane, we have a show that we've developed and packaged that's going on now called Prisoners of Prohibition. And it's our way of telling these very unfortunate and egregious and sometimes just like ridiculous interviews and stories about individuals who were, convicted for, minimal amounts of cannabis, right? Or put into situations where they were wrongfully convicted for involvement in a cannabis-related incident. And that, when you see these stories and these horror stories, hopefully that will help, again, the mainstream people who are part of the voting contingency to be more proactive and learn about what measures are coming up, what you can do to write your local representatives, utilizing the cities and states that have started to overturn these convictions and expunge these criminal records, because that has a domino effect, obviously, that we can go on for a long time as it relates to social justice. So that's where we stand on the issue. It's definitely about, showing up, showing out. We just have to do our best and contribute our time and energy to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs in this space, and then do what we do best in telling stories through media with regards to social justice.
Yeah, because I think I think the storytelling is so key here, because when I talk to people, I had a chance to talk to some of the people behind the campaign on Proposition 207 in Arizona, and been following what's going on in New Jersey. And I've asked folks, do you think that voters are going to turn out not just because they're interested in consumption and they think, they think that cannabis should be legal, but do they understand the connection between the injustices of the war on drugs and the systemic racism that we have in this country and the structures that have been in place? And it's interesting. Like the governor of New Jersey has just been talking about this a lot recently, and he actually has been talking about that's a reason why people should vote for legalization in New Jersey. It's been, and various governors have come out to talk about this. I wonder if citizens have really made that jump, but I think what you're saying is the more stories there are, the more that you can have real life anecdotes and examples. I think people will make that connection. But to this point, I think there's been a little bit of a disconnect. So I'm with you. I hope that these stories continue to be told. I have one last question for you before we wrap up. I have a feeling everyone in the audience is probably wondering this, but as we talked about in the book, and as you and I have talked about, you kind of describe yourself as someone who looks for these moments of arbitrage, and you've been successful on seizing on those opportunities. So, what advice do you have for investors or even entrepreneurs who are listening to this interview about, how do they sort of get in front of things before they, but how do they find those windows of opportunity before everyone else, whether it's, creating a new business or investing in something before everybody else gets in on it? What's sort of your routine to sort of find things that nobody else finds? Like, do you have a diet of certain things that you read, or it'd be great to know sort of kind of the inside baseball of how you do what you do.
I think that it's really, for me, I'm quite habitual about, and have trained myself over many hours to listen to signals and to see when you look at trends or topics of discussion or an indication of need in society across the most polarizing maybe areas of a conversation, then, and maybe polarizing is not the right word, just like drastically different areas of conversation, right? That is part of my personal regimen. I think there's as much to learn from like a real conversation with, my 18-year-old niece as there is with, the CEO of Morgan Stanley, right? I think that everybody has something to offer, and there are signals that will be provided in a discussion, whether that's on YouTube, on a video I'm watching, whether that's on TikTok, whether that's on Fox News or CNN. I try to kind of really pay attention to a lot of different outlets of media. You can tell like I'm fascinated with media, and see like the voices, the conversations that are happening. And I try to have real conversations with people from various industries. I always feel like I walk out of a conversation feeling more confident and clear on, even though this person's talking about X and this person's talking about Y, what they really have in common as a need and a white space is Z, and then kind of barreling forward on that. And I think also at the end of the day, it's just my personal philosophy. I've always wanted to make sure that whatever we do was through my lens, better for and added to, the health and upliftment of society, right? And also did good work and created good opportunities, but also actually contributed something in moving society forward. I mean, for me, cannabis is really more about accessible ritual medicine and peace of mind and mental health, as much as it totally should be everyone's right to have to be able to experience recreational use, right? But for me, that's more my guiding light, right? And it's why also that I'm really, fascinated with these new emerging industries like psilocybin and microdosing, right? And how that can really treat depression through clinical research and improve mental health. And in a world that we've all seen seems to be exponentially getting more chaotic, I think having cannabis, both THC and CBD, in our life to give us peace of mind and clarity is healthy for those who need it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I this has been a fascinating conversation, and I love, I can never get tired of hearing you talk about all of your passion for the plant, but also just your business philosophy. It was just a great interview. So thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everyone listening appreciated your insights, and it's always great to talk to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Heather.